So before I get to the actual video I will be making for this for obviously the video, the Fist of the Blue Sky video, I want to talk a little about the fact that, like, just very briefly, it's been an entire fucking year now, roughly a little more time since my last Fist of the North Star. Well, not this one, the summer 2021. Well, that was the last one, but like these ones right here, the fucking Kaio one, and I believe even the top 10 anime one is over a year old. I actually thought I did that this year or last year in 2020, but I guess that entire time fucking period just like fucking went by in a fucking haze. So just something I want to throw out there. With that said, let's go and get started with the video now. And yeah, fix that later. Alright, so today we're going to be talking about Mong. I'm not going to try pronouncing his name more than that because it's all in Chinese, and I'm going to be honest, my pronunciation's kind of shit all across the board. So the way we're going to be doing this, we're going to be going over the history of the character, what they do in the story itself, the fights with Kenshiro, and then because it's a Blue Sky, I will be covering whether or not this character can make it very far in the actual Fist of the North Star series. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so Mong's history is super fucking weird, and even the wiki's a little unsure of where the fuck shit occurs, so I'm just going to try and piece it together myself, and I'm going to give you my interpretation of how the story goes based on what we know. So the first piece we learn about Mong is actually from Colonel Giese, or Charles, I think his name is, and what we learned from him is that one day, while Mong was training, Mong used opium to master his ultimate secret technique, which is pretty good, but we'll talk about him later when we talk about his techniques and his fighting style and stuff. And so he becomes addicted to opium very early on as the first thing we learn about him regarding his history. In order to master the secret technique, prior to this, he had already gained madness, which, at least according to Charles, does increase one's fighting power or one's fighting ki. So with madness, he does get stronger. We'll talk a little more about that when we get to his technique. The next time we see him, he's going to Shanghai to fight Kenshiro, the successor to Hokuto Shinken, because the two protagonists of the series are both called Kenshiro. This was referred to as Kasumi Kenshiro, and the other one's just called Kenshiro. I don't even know if he has a first or last name, honestly. And what ends up happening is his master tries to kill him. His master does put up a pretty solid fight against him. In fact, he's even able to hit the pressure points, sort of. Like, his master is actually able to speed blitz Mong to an extent. Mong launches a flurry of blows on him, and his master is able to actually close the gap even with all the fists occurring. His master then talks shit for like a couple seconds before he learns that Mong learned the secret technique or the ultimate technique of the branch, and then Mong just kills him outright. And this is where things get more complicated. So I think the next event that occurs in the timeline specifically is that Mong goes to Japan and ends up falling in love with Kenshiro's girlfriend, and then he deals with her. I'm not going to spoil what happens to her, but he deals with her and Pen, her brother, and then from what I understand, the next event that occurs in this character's timeline is he meets the Taoist who extends his life a little longer, which then leads into the events of the main series of Blue Sky. His only motivation is just to prove that he's the strongest fighter of Hokuto, or at the very least that his branch of Hokuto is actually the strongest. Not very strong motivation across the board, nothing really else to talk about here until we get to the Kenshiro fights. Again, I will talk about his secret technique and what that does during those fights and what they imply. So with that said, we're just going to get... The character's fine. I like him for the most part. There is a bit of a cop-out in the second fight that I'll talk about that I'm not too happy about, but for the most part, I think he serves his purpose well. Unfortunately, it's Fist of the North Star, so characters with a lot of depth don't really occur that often for the minor antagonists, and unfortunately, while he is one of the stronger characters in the series of Blue Sky, the others above him would either have beaten him, or at the very least, two of them would have beaten him for sure. So with that said, we're just going to get into the fights now, and then we'll talk about, where he skidacks. Alright, so we're going to talk about the first fight with Kasumi Kenshiro, which does demonstrate Mong's abilities the best overall. Because in the second fight, we only get to really see his secret technique in action, and we don't really see anything else. The initial fight starts with Kenshiro throwing a bunch of silverware at one of the mob bosses, or one of the sort of like gangsters that he wants to kill, as revenge for his friend's torture. And Mong here just catches all the silverware out of the air casually, and then he's able to morph its shape into a ball. And then he throws the balls at Kenshiro just by flicking his fingers. I'm assuming some variation of the North Star Vortex grip or whatever. The North Star has a 2-finger grip that allows him to return anything back. I'm assuming this is just another variation of it. In fact, the actual panel that shows him throw it, you don't even see his hand flicker, his fingers move, implying that his hand is moving so fast you can't even see it. Kenshiro is able to dodge most of it, but he does get cut, splitting his ear. Ooh, man, I'm actually looking at it right now. That's a terrible injury. And then we learn from Kenshiro that his technique is just ki manipulation. And unfortunately, that is all that's shown with this specific fighting style. And it's a little interesting, but it kind of gets boring real quick when you get to the second fight. So what ends up happening is, as the fight progresses, we do see Mong's expertise of chi manipulation or token manipulation full display. He's able to actually siphon power from Kenshiro. I've said this before, but if you can actually siphon someone else's toki as a part of your fighting style, you would be top tier in the majority of this series as long as you can fight pretty well. And Mong actually can fight pretty well. At the very least, in the first fight, he can. He's able to channel and drain energy completely. It's great. Kenshiro even collapses a little bit at the effects of his energy being drained. So what Kenshiro ends up doing here is rather interesting. The way he counters it is he channels a fuck ton of power into his, I guess, hands, we'll call it, and he just blasts that energy forward to be absorbed, and that launches Mong's hand back, giving Kenshiro the chance to move in on him. The interesting part here is, despite Mong not really demonstrating much beyond this point, he's able to perfectly dodge, except for his ear being split as well, because Kenshiro gets him back for it. But he's able to keep up with Kenshiro and dodge all of his kicks easily, and he's even able to match Kenshiro at 30%, breaking both their arms in the process. He's able to fully keep up with him and everything. The fact that he actually just straight up breaks his arm is incredibly impressive at 30%. Unfortunately, the result is that Mong does have a broken arm as well. So the first fight ends very briefly. They're just exchanging their abilities, and you see Mong's energy displayed on I'd say full force a little bit, because there is something he doesn't do here, and he doesn't even do this in the second fight all that much. But basically, we learned here he's able to drain energy, and he is able to keep up with Kenshiro physically at 30%, and is able to keep up with him speed-wise. So, good demonstration, but nothing too crazy from Mong in this particular fight. So the second fight begins after Mong reveals the fate of Kenshiro's girlfriend, and he starts off by slamming his fist, or at the very least his broken arm, because his arm is still broken at this point. Both their arms are broken, actually. Onto a piano, breaking it. And then Kenshiro blitzes behind him, but he seems to slice him, which is kind of weird. I really dislike when Fist of the North Star does this, because the slicing is a Nanto technique, but the North Star can do it too. So it's kind of like, does Nanto just do it better than the others? There is argument for yes on that, but that's not the point here. And then we just get things like this occurring. So he basically tells him that, like, the fist of a mad dog is worthless to me, because Mong is referred to as a mad dog by a lot of people. And what we find out here is Mong, like I mentioned at the beginning, does use madness to enhance his abilities. So it's kind of interesting. So basically, Mong at the beginning of the fight is like where a lot of other fighters sit at, but he's able to amp himself further with his madness. We don't know how far this amp goes specifically, but we do have an idea based on what his master says during their fight. I'll talk a little more about this later. Now, I'm going to be referencing the manga panel specifically and what the manga panels seem to imply, but I do want to point out that Blue Sky did receive an anime at one point, and the anime seems to imply this panel is a physical attack, but the manga panel implies that Mong is blasting Kenshiro with his madness, or at least with his toki, and then he blasts Kenshiro back through, breaking through a wall and breaking the ground. Here's where we learn again from Gisi that he's able to increase his power. I will say a lot of the actual information we get from Mong occurs during the fight itself, which is fine, but it's kind of weird that out of nowhere we get the backstory for these two during the fight he's in, during his second fight. He is able to take blows from Kenshiro for the most part. He's also able to fully keep up with Kenshiro. He's able to just completely fuck with him all across the board. And after a quick little exchange, he moves in to strike the pressure points at the back of his neck, but Mong is able to catch the fingers before they hit, and then he breaks Kenshiro's fingers to keep him at bay. Or I think I'll just refer to him as Kasumi for the most part. He is referred to as Kasumi Kenshiro, but I think I'll just stick to Kasumi. And he just basically he's perfectly able to keep up with him, which is great. The problem here is that, again, this isn't 100% Kenshiro. That shouldn't really affect speed, but that should be affecting his overall attack potency, which in universe is a little wonky as to how much stronger 100% Kenshiro gets. We just do know it is a substantial margin. So what ends up happening here is Kenshiro learns that he did master the ultimate technique of the Sun Dipper Fist, or the Sun Family Fist, which is essentially swapping the locations of your pressure points around. It's a little unclear. We'll talk more about the technique afterwards, but then Mong just starts going off, attacking Kenshiro, landing kicks on him, landing punches and everything. It's great. We actually do see him, like fighting Kenshiro and beating him to an extent. We then get intercut with the Master's fight, where the Master does, again, like I mentioned earlier, speed blitz him, but he loses because of the secret technique that swaps your pressure point locations. And then we end up finding out is that Mong has been fucking up Kenshiro in the time that they've been talking, and Kenshiro hasn't really he has landed strikes on him, but nothing severe. We end up finding out that Kenshiro was able to counter Mong's pressure point dislocation technique by being the North Star, basically. Basically, what you find out from Kasumi is that there are certain pressure points you can't move no matter how hard you try, and by hitting those, Kenshiro is able to beat it. But then he also states that this secret technique is nothing to a true successor to the Divine Fist of the North Star, probably because they know the pressure points that wouldn't move around by such a technique. He ends up blowing a hole in Mong's hand to the point where you can see completely through it. It's pretty cool. And this is probably where we get to the saddest part about Mong's character, is once Kenshiro lays out perfectly that his entire fucking life's journey of gaining his strength is basically meaningless, he does have a moment of reflection of where he basically is no, that can't be true. He's in denial, basically. And then what ends up happening is, even though Kenshiro tells him, it's done, it's over, tell me what I want to know, he still continues to try and fight Kenshiro regardless. Now, during the fight, Mong now does get beat up pretty badly, but they end up giving another explanation for why Mong ends up losing here. And I really don't like this, what they end up doing here. So what happens is you find out after all of this that Mong's dying throughout the course of the fight. He's been dying since the very beginning. His opium addiction ultimately destroyed his body. So it's very kind of infuriating that we don't really see what would have happened if Mong was fighting at full potential here. Now, I want to point out the decrease in ability here is substantial, to the point where he's actually able to get tagged by bullets at this point. Prior to this point, he does have a fight with Gisi, where Gisi enhances a bullet to be a lot faster and a lot more versatile. It's able to curve in the air and stuff. And he dodges it ultimately no problem. It does hit him, but that's to be expected. He's fighting another fighter of Hokuto. So we don't know when his body started decaying or when the actual effects started becoming prominent. Because in the first fight, you didn't really notice this. But I'm assuming what the idea here is that when he activated his madness for the final battle, his body couldn't take that strain, along with the opium addiction he had acquired. And by this point, he even admits, after he gets shot, that his body's just a clumsy bag of bones. Kenshiro also states prior to this that he wouldn't be able to go a second round with anybody, or he wouldn't be able to fight anyone beyond this point. That's actually why Kenshiro doesn't just outright kill him, because he's too sick to kill anymore. I guess he holds a little more of a respect code than someone like Raul does in the main series, but that's beside the point. And that's ultimately what happens to Mong. He does die after this. I'm going to talk about his death right now instead of talking about it at the end. He does ultimately end up dying to the bullet wound and his disease, before revealing to Kenshiro everything that happened between him and his girlfriend. Which is kind of a shame. Now, I do like how Mong does accept his death relatively easily. He more or less dies to the disease more than the bullet itself, but it's just kind of annoying that they did this fighter dirty like this at the end of the run, especially since you have no indication of this disease or this opium addiction ravaging his body until the second fight occurs. But with that said, we're going to go ahead and talk about his fighting style as a whole, what he can do, what he should be able to do with his fighting style, and then we'll talk about how far he make it in the Fist of the North Star. So Mong gets done a huge disservice even on the Fist of the North Star wiki. Like, if you're to go onto the wiki to see what his actual descriptions are for his abilities, they only have 3 abilities. They don't have anything else. They don't even have the one where he absorbs the Toki out of the air or out of the room, to siphon Kenshiro's power, or Kasumi's power. So it's a little weird. I'm going to give my opinions on it and explain what they do, but there could be different scenarios and there could be differences here. So right off the bat, telekinesis and Toki manipulation up the wazoo. No question about that. We do see the first time we encounter him is he puts his hand on someone's head and he's able to yank out their entire sort of brain from their head with just his Toki, which is a pretty cool scene for the most part, but it's just kind of basically he can infuse Toki and use it in attacks, something we already knew. Again, he's able to drain Toki from other fighters and from the area around him in general. He's also able to use telekinesis, similar to Gisi. We do know that he does have another technique that he himself doesn't do, but he should be able to based on Charles or the Gisi, who allows him to breathe for 10 minutes without needing air. But moreover to his 2 unique abilities that he does gain. Obviously, he has, the North Star skills and stuff of that nature. He also does have pressure point knowledge as well. But, so, the Madness God Soul, the Master claims that the limit of madness is that you are still basically human even when amping yourself with madness. Whereas someone like Kenshiro or the North Star successors, according to him, are divine. Or the original successor to this fighting style was divinely chosen, which ultimately implies that Mong might not be the strongest fighter in his entire art's history. I sort of disagree with that notion, but we'll talk a little more about that at the later points. And basically, so we know that the Madness amp is not comparable to 100% based on this, or at the very least that the North Stars can amp themselves higher, and they do this via unlocking 100% of their body. So while it's still an amp to his abilities, we don't know the full extent of the amp or what it does, but it does make him stronger overall. So we just know that he gains an quantifiable amp increase. He is able to keep up with Kenshiro until his body starts failing him, and he's even able to beat his ass a little bit. So it's a pretty impressive amp, but unfortunately, because of his body decaying, we can't really confirm how big it is. So this is where we get to his most impressive technique that he has, which is the displacement of pressure points or pressure point transference, which, again, just allows him to change the location of his pressure points and apparently his blood flow as well. That's basically all it does, though. And we know there are certain pressure points that don't move. It's a little unclear if they move to a specific location or if he can just freely move the pressure points around his body. It's also a little unclear if this is similar to Souther's Emperor's armor or if Souther's Emperor's armor is superior. Because Kasumi claims that something like this is ineffective against a true successor to the North Star, and yet 2 successor level North Star fighters in Fist of the North Star could not figure out Souther's body until Kenshiro was put into a life or death situation. So he's got a pretty impressive technique, but there's nothing really crazy here that would really make you think oh shit, we got something really good here with this fighting style. Outside of the energy drainage and stuff, there is one other thing that he himself doesn't demonstrate. I did mention earlier he does blast Kenshiro back with Toki, but what we end up finding out in a later fight is that the Heaven's Piercing technique, the one Kenshiro uses to defeat Souther, was actually created after witnessing Mong fight. So, logically, Mong should have the ability of the Heaven's Piercing attack as well, or should be able to perform something similar to it, which we do see when he rips out that guy's brains with just his Toki. So, he does know the pressure point locations, and he is able to touch them with his energy. He has telekinesis, basically, and he can self-amp himself. And at 30%, or without the ampage, he was already capable of keeping up with Kenshiro and almost being equal to him in every capacity. So pretty good stuff all across the board. Now we're going to go ahead and talk. I'll go ahead and rate the character as well. There's no official character rating for him, but I'm going to go ahead and just break down the 5 tiers just for a little fun here. And I will have to say as well that originally I was under the impression that the Blue Sky characters were vastly weaker than the North Star characters because of the way the feats are done and the fact that characters like Jaggy later on can perform feats from the top tier Blue Sky fighters. But the series goes out of its way to confirm that Kasumi Kenshiro was stronger than Ryukin, and based on Blue Sky Regenesis, that still asserts he's the strongest successor to Hokuto Shinken. I don't think that's referencing the main Kenshiro, because this is still a prequel regardless, so it would only be referencing probably Ryukin, since he's the only one who appears in the prequel. Kenshiro does appear as a baby, but Kenshiro only becomes the strongest man of Hokuto Shinken near the end of his sort of like, near the end of his, well, not near the end, like in the middle of his manga. So I'll still say that the regular Kenshiro should still be stronger based on Rao's statement and Rao knowing this character. But basically the point is that this character, Kasumi, is stronger than even a Prime Ryukin, which would mean that all of the characters he fights and Kasumi Kenshiro himself should have similar stats and scale to North Star characters as well, for the most part, because Ryukin as an old man is referred to as a AAA fighter. As an old man, he's a lot weaker than when he was younger, because obviously as you get older, you're going to get weaker regardless. Even if he didn't get weaker, that's still the extent of his ability, and again, Kasumi Kenshiro would have been stronger than him. So for Mong in particular, I'm going to go ahead and say Mong is actually going to be just a A fighter, A rank fighter. I don't think he earns a double A or a triple A, mainly because of the fact that while he does actually keep up with Kenshiro, there's nothing beyond his actual natural ability that really screams his character should be a double A. Regarding power, I'm going to say his power would probably be around a 4. Yeah, I'm going to say he has a power of 4. His speed, I'm also going to say, sits around a 4 or a 5. He is able to keep up with Kasumi Kenshiro, but I'm going to say it's going to be a 4. His skills are going to be a 4 as well. Again, like, he is a good fighter, but he doesn't have the durability. Also looks, I'm just going to say fucking looks of 4, since he does change his shape to be more demonic. And charisma, this man has next to no charisma, so I'm going to say 2 or 1 to be honest. But the problem here specifically, so the reason, again, he's not getting double A or anything above single A is because he doesn't really have anything else going for him besides his secret technique, and his body is decaying. He is able to he's not really able to take blows from Kenshiro, because at 30%, they broke each other's arms, so it's like, that's still 30% Kenshiro. That's impressive, and we're going to talk about where he would scale in the main series or how far he'd get, but that's still 30% Kenshiro, you know? Like, you need a little more here, a little more oomph if you want to hit the double A territory. Also, his techniques, again, nothing really too crazy beyond the pressure point change, but that's only going to affect North Star fighters. So, that's ultimately his fine style, my thoughts on it, and now we're going to get to how far he would have made it into the main series. So, when we're going over Mong here, we have to talk about the 3 to 4 schools he'll be going up against. There's obviously the Hokuto Shinken members, then there's the Hokuto Ryukin fighters, there's Gento, and then there's the Nanto 6. I will be including both Juza and Fudo in that Nanto 6 discussion because of the fact that the last Nanto General doesn't fight. So, with that said, how far does Mong get? I'm going to go ahead and break down each individual school and talk about whether Mong could beat the fighters and what that would mean. So first off, we're going to bring in Gento. Yeah, Mong should have no problem getting past Solia and Falco because they talk too much, and they also stay at a distance just enough for Mong's actual techniques to be very effective against them. And while we never see Mong deal with other Toki attacks specifically, given his mastery of Toki manipulation, and again, the fact that his technique is what gives Kenshiro the Heaven's Piercing Fist later, or the Heaven's Piercing Strike, there's a good chance you could argue that Mong could dissipate Gento's Toki attacks before they reach him. But even then, they'd have to channel Toki into their hands to fire it like Kasumi did. But again, freaking Mong here can just absorb their Toki from their bodies. There's no reason to assume that they would be able to adapt fast enough before Mong's able to kill them, or before Mong's able to at least do serious damage to them. And again, that's assuming he can't just dissipate it, because Kenshiro launches the Toki forward in order to blast his hand back, which you could argue they could do against Mong as well, that they could just launch Toki Blast at him. But that's assuming Mong's not going to just move in and let them live. He was very concerned about Kenshiro being a Hokuto fighter per se, and he was being cautious, it seems, as a result of that. He was more or less testing Kenshiro in that first encounter. But even if, let's say, they do close the gap and they do move in on him, that's not going to make too strong of a difference because of the fact that ultimately Mong is able to keep up with Kenshiro and he is able to enhance himself with madness. They could probably do some decent damage to him if they can actually close the gap and he can't absorb them. Solia was able to fuck up Kenshiro a little bit, as was Falco. But Mong's not going to care about Falco's leg injury, so he's going to easily take advantage of Falco's weaknesses and take him out like that. As for Solia, Solia does get matched and beaten by Kenshiro relatively easily after the fact. Again, especially since Mong can also fire things telekinetically and does have range on his side as well, and he wouldn't be afraid to use that. So even freaking Solia's ability to sort of like coat his body with aura or with Toki, similar to Falco, wouldn't matter because Mong can just use his madness to just blast through it or to just, again, hurt him without having to touch him. So personally, against both Gento fighters, I think Mong would have a very easy time dealing with both of them, especially since Falco's leg is missing. If Falco didn't have the leg injury, I think Falco could probably beat Mong in a fight, but I'm pretty sure he'd take it against Solia easily. Moving on to the Nanto 6. Very briefly, I'm going to be upfront. He doesn't beat any of these guys. And I mean any of them. Because Nanto is a hyper-aggressive fighting style, and the main thing Mong has going for him, besides pressure points, is energy absorption. No Nanto fighter is going to wait around for this dumbass to be fucking absorbing Toki from the fucking air. Shin, Rei, Yuta, and fucking Shu, they're going to go ham on him from word go. He's not going to have time to do his fucking bullshit energy absorption. Again, the reason I just said that he would most likely beat Gento is because Gento fighters do keep a distance and they do sort of talk a lot, whereas Nanto fighters, they're more quick to the point with their fighting. But even hypothetically, let's say he does manage to absorb Toki from them and stuff like that. Let's say he does do that. Unfortunately, we have no evidence to confirm that Mong would be able to tank blows from Nanto. Gento's a little different. Gento is like sort of like it destroys you on like the surface level, but a lot of people can tank Gento strikes and not die immediately from it, or not suffer incredible ramifications from the initial attack. Look at the Harm brothers. But the Nanto fighters, they cut you. They're going to be cutting deep. And again, Mong's greatest advantage, besides, him just being a bit stronger than your average fighter, is strictly the fact that he can move his pressure points around. That's not a secret that's going to affect Nanto in any capacity. So, truth be told, Mong's probably going to lose to all the Nanto fighters because they're not going to give him a chance to use his drainage ability. And on top of that, even if Mong doesn't use his drainage ability and sticks around in the fight, his main advantages are useless against Nanto fighters. Now, you could argue he does have pressure point knowledge, so he could just hit their pressure points, but he's only equal in speed to a 30. But he is relatively equal in speed to Kenshiro, but his body is going to decay after a while as well. So you'd have to argue for a longevity fight here too. Because Mong, in order to beat these guys, is going to have to activate his madness. Keep in mind that both Shin, Rei, these two fighters were equal to 30% Kenshiro, if not stronger than him to an extent at the end of their sort of encounters, or in Shin's case at the beginning of his encounter. So Mong's going to have to activate madness on most of these Nanto fighters from word go to have a chance against them. And at that point, it's only a matter of time before Mong collapses. So Mong would have to finish the fight prior to, but Mong fights defensively. Now, you could argue it's only because it's against Kenshiro, but regardless, he'd have to move in and hit pressure points, and Mong doesn't seem to fight like that. He seems to fight more by overwhelming his opponents with his Toki aura, which is fine, but that's like the most ineffective way to fight in this series because you're basically beating someone down with brute force instead of using your ultimate techniques to actually deal some damage and go for insta-kills. So all the Nanto fighters, and I'm going to include Fudo and Juza here, they would just stomp him out eventually. Because they would either win a battle of longevity or they would kill him or weaken him prior to his body failing. I didn't mention Salder because, again, Salder would just outright stomp this man no problem. He would blitz him and kill him instantly, if we're being honest. Moving on to Hokuto Ryuken. So, I'm going to be upfront. This man is not beating Han, Huey, or Kaio, unless you want to argue that his energy drainage is good enough to fuck with Hokuto Ryuken. And it's possible it is. If this man can remove Kaio's demon aura, you can make an honest-to-God argument that Mong could have beaten Kaio in a fight. Because Kaio is not that good of a fighter after he loses his fucking demon aura. He's not incompetent, so I think he could probably still beat Mong, because Mong is going to run out of time because of his madness. But real talk, if you can get rid of the demon aura for Kaio, you have a pretty good chance you're beating him. Han... No, Han demonstrates head-on. He's able to keep up with 100% Kenshiro, blow for blow and everything. Again, Kenshiro's speed does not increase at 100%. So keeping up with 30% Kenshiro speed-wise is the same thing as keeping up at 100%. But Han can keep up with 100% Kenshiro without his arms breaking and shit. So even if Mong could, block his attacks, Han would break his fucking limbs. Now, you could argue that this mainly happens because of the opium, but that's not the point here. The point is that... Well, you could argue again with the madness that he'd be more durable, but the point is that Han can match blow for blow with the 100% Kenshiro. Mong could match blow for blow with the 30% Kenshiro, and I mean blow for blow as in breaking his fucking limbs on every impact. So Han would have no problems dealing with fucking Mong. Neither would Huey for the most part, especially with the Anrei Tenha. And Kaio ultimately would not lose to Mong, but you could argue Kaio is actually kind of the shittiest fighter among the Hokuto Ryuken by the time we get to him in the series. because he is able to keep up with Kenshiro at the end of their fight, but outside of his demon aura and his aura being greater than the other two, he doesn't really demonstrate any solid fighting feats beyond them, but he would still be stronger in them. So ultimately, unless Mong... Again, if Mong can straight up dissipate energy the way he potentially could, Gento and Hokuto Ryukin get fucked hard by Mong. Straight up. Except for Han, because Han fights very physically. But Huey and Kaio, who focus on a lot of energy attacks and on a Tenha, if Mong can legitimately disrupt those techniques, they're going to get fucked. I'm just going to be upfront here, because Mong is a good fighter. And if Mong does use, like, his actual fucking ability to fuck with people's internal organs and shit, again, still not going to work on Nanto fighters, but, like, if he does use the Heaven's Piercing and shit, or just uses what he does where he fucks with that guy's brain and rips it out like that, honestly, most of Hokuto Ryukin's going to get fucking destroyed by Mong. Again, this is mainly because they fight based on Toki and their energies. Again, I'm saying that if Mong can disrupt their main techniques, they'd get fucked. This would not affect Nanto fighters, despite the fact that Hokuto Ryukin fighters are stronger than most Nanto fighters. Going to the North Star crew, this man fucking destroys Jaggy, no question about it. And honestly, Mong could probably beat Toki in a fight. Because all Mong has to do is weaken Toki, and Toki's gonna get fucked. Like, yeah, Toki's aura is still there, his Toki aura is there, but his body is very frail at this, well, I say frail, but I mean, we're talking North Star frail. So it's like, it's still superhuman, but it's like, in comparison to these fighters, Mong and Toki have probably the worst case because they're both dying from a disease. But Mong can at least enhance his body much easier and can absorb people's, or not absorb it, well, actually, no, he does absorb freaking Kenshiro's Toki. So if like fucking Toki doesn't go in for a straight blitz and Toki doesn't fight like that, he kind of keeps a distance and only goes in when it's needed, but he does like to stay back a little bit if you read his Gaiden. Mong would just drain his energy enough for Toki to collapse, and then Mong would just come in for the kill and finish him off. Like, if Toki were to go hard fist style and go ham aggressive on Mong, you could argue he would have beaten Mong, but even then, because again, unfortunately, we only see Mong absorb energy from a distance while having time to concentrate. If Mong could passively absorb Toki, even with his Madness Aura activated, this fucker would stomp the verse hard. But unfortunately, we can only confirm that he can do it from a distance. So I think he can keep up with Fist of Strength Toki a little bit. Not like the actual physical strikes, but he could probably dodge most of Toki's attacks. And again, if he can outlast Toki, and truth be told, he does have 2 fights with Kasumi Kenshiro, so you could argue he would have enough time to outlast Toki. But then again, we don't know if the madness drained his body a lot faster. I'm going to say that if Toki comes up talking to him, or like if Toki doesn't go straight up ham from where to go, Mong would beat him in a fight. Regarding Rao and Kenshiro, the main one, no, because even if they wait around a little bit, he's still going to get fucked by them. These fuckers are at peak condition. If Toki was in peak condition, Toki would have no problems fighting Mong either. I want to make that clear as well. But again, Toki's body is a lot more frail there. So with that said, I think if you were to put Mong into the Fist of North Star, he would be in the upper middle tier of characters maybe, or at the very least, you could argue for him being upper middle tier, but his abilities ultimately wouldn't work on Nanto fighters because they just hard counter his ability in general. And as the reason I didn't bring up the pressure point thing, which you could actually bring up the pressure points against Hokuto Ryukin as well, but again, Han's able to brute force his way through 100% Kenshiro consistently. Mong's not going to be able to keep up with that. As for the other 2 Hokuto Ryukin fighters, yeah, the energy manipulation, the Toki, and like the fucking the pressure point divergence would work as well. But they both, well, at least Huey possesses a variation of some Nanto cutting abilities, so he'd be able to deal with that one. But again, I think Mong would be able to beat him before then. And Kaio has nothing really outside pressure points, so Kaio would get fucked by the pressure point replacement as well. But I think Kaio could just straight up AP or just straight up brute force through Mong, especially since he doesn't mind blasting auras. But again, if Mong can dissipate aura as well as he should be able to based on what we see, that motherfucker would stomp out most of Hokuto Ryukin, like I said already. It's not going to work on any of the North Star fighters because they're all successor level North Star fighters, and they would all know how to counter Mong's technique of pressure point divergence very easily. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys for your time as always. Have a nice day. I will see you guys on the next stream or video.